After America is made on the lands of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Hi, I'm Emma Shortis, and this is After America. The United States government is blackmailing Europe. Over the weekend, President Trump said that his administration would impose 10% tariffs on European states that opposed a US takeover of Greenland. They will kick in on the 1st of February and increase to 25% in June.
This tariff will be due and payable until such time as a deal is reached for the complete and total purchase of Greenland.
The United States right now, we are the hottest country in the world. We are the strongest country in the world. The Europeans project weakness. The U.S. projects strength.
In a joint statement, the eight said, tariff threats undermine transatlantic relations and risk a dangerous downward spiral. We will continue to stand united and coordinated in our response. We are committed to upholding our sovereignty.
Our position on Greenland is non-negotiable. We've made that very clear. This decision on tariffs is completely wrong.
Denmark is a tiny country with a tiny economy and a tiny military. They cannot defend Greenland. They cannot control the territory of Greenland.
Denmark's Prime Minister accusing Trump of blackmail, its Foreign Minister emphasizing the need to keep talking.
We have been asking since the very beginning of this to have a constructive dialogue with our American ally and friends. We opened that dialogue last week. We will not give up on that.
European leaders are scrambling to respond. They're considering imposing retaliatory tariffs through a special anti-coercion instrument they originally created for use against China. And they're engaging in joint military exercises in Greenland as a demonstration of their resolve. This has shaken NATO to its core, and it may well break the decades-old alliance entirely. No one can be totally sure what happens next. But Trump's actions have broken all trust, and America's traditional allies must adapt to this new reality. The America we thought we knew is gone, and it isn't coming back. To help us think through what this all means, we're really pleased to welcome back friend of the show, Matt Duss. Matt is the Executive Vice President of the Centre for International Policy, which is a think tank based in Washington, D.C. Before joining CIP, Matt was a visiting scholar in the American Statecraft Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And from 2017 to 2022, he was Foreign Policy Advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders. Matt, yikes. How are you?
Right. No. That's I appreciate you starting that way. I'm fine, personally here, in my house, in Alexandria, Virginia. But yeah, things have gotten a little crazy. We didn't get any real time to bring in the new year before, we're invading and invading foreign countries and kidnapping leaders. So anyway, Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year too. I was sort of joking with my friends over the break about how American politics has this rude habit of being very active in January, but it's not funny.
It's not. No. I mean, it's no accident,
Mm-hmm.
People are trying to relax and if an administration knows it wants to get up to no good and kind of minimize the response, unfortunately, that's what that's all about.
Yeah. And it really is getting up to no good. You mentioned their possible invasions, and there's a few that we could talk about.
Right, more than one. That's how great things are going. Yeah.
Let's start with Greenland.
Mm-hmm.
We had images of the European foreign ministers, coming out of a meeting with Vance and Rubio, looking like pretty shell-shocked and resorting to sharing cigarettes out on the street.
Right, no, I saw those too.
Yeah, wild. Quite a few European countries are now effectively engaged in joint military exercises in Greenland. It is as bad as it seems.
Well, I mean, when you've got them preparing to dispatch actual troops to defend one NATO country against another NATO country, you have definitely crossed over into yet another circle of hell. So yeah, I mean, even I'm skeptical. I mean, Trump has been interested in Greenland for a while. There's actually been this weird discourse within Washington among some of these crazy hawks like Tom Cotton, who've been out there trying to make a plausible sounding strategic argument for it. the fact that the people of Greenland themselves are clearly uninterested in becoming part of the United States should matter, I think, a lot to us, if not end the debate right there. And yet, here we are. But yeah, I saw those those clips yesterday of the folks coming out of the meeting and kind of shakily trying to light each other's cigarettes. We've all, I don't know, most of us have been there. But there's been a lot of conversation about, what should happen if the United States forcibly tries to take Greenland, or even just, continues to press and coerce to get to that outcome. I mean, this is really almost unimaginable. The idea that we'd be doing this to some of our closest allies.
Yeah, it is. And I have to keep kind of answering questions about what will happen to NATO and what the collapse of NATO would mean.
Yeah.
And I don't really have an answer. Do you?
I don't see how, again, can a security alliance survive if one of its most important member simply decides it will seize the territory of another member? I mean, what is that? What that's not a security alliance anymore. So I think that's just what the outcome would be here. But again, Donald Trump, of course, doesn't really care about NATO. He's, I guess the process of withdrawing from NATO would be kind of complicated, or at least in Trump's mind, and always trying to get inside Trump's mind is always a very frightening experience. But, I can see how, rather than just coming out and announcing one day we are withdrawing from NATO, creating a pretext by saying these, hoity-toity Europeans won't let us do what we need to do for our own interests and our own security and our own prosperity, which is taking Greenland. And therefore, because they are being mean to us, we have, we have no choice but to withdraw from the NATO alliance. That even sounds crazy coming out of my mouth, but that's unfortunately where we're at.
On Iran, have they crossed your red line yet to trigger a response?
Well, no, they're starting to, it looks like, and there seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. These are violent, if you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just they rule through violence. We've been told that the killing in Iran is stopping, and it's stopped and stopping. And there's no plan for executions or executions. So I've been told that a good authority will find out about it.
The Ayatollah blames President Trump, threatening him from the bunker where he's reportedly been in hiding since the U.S. strikes last June.
We consider the U.S. president a criminal for the casualties, damages, and the slander he inflicted on the Iranian nation.
President Trump saying enough is enough. Quote, it's time to look for new leadership in Iran.
And at the same time, of course, the administration has been talking, or Trump has been talking up intervention in Iran as well, again, which, unfortunately is less crazy given the history of the United States' role there. He seems to have, at least, this morning when we're recording at 7 a.m. Friday, Australian time, he seems to have walked that back. Partly, it sounds like at the behest of Israel and some Arab nations. Is that how you're reading it? Because the momentum certainly seemed to be heading towards intervention.
Yeah, it really did. And I think, it was clear already that Arab countries did not want this intervention to happen. And we can get into that. But Israel had been really pushing for it, and Israel's allies in the United States had really been pushing for this. So, I've seen a few, kind of conjectures over what's going on here. I think one of the most obvious ones is like, well, the U.S. understands and Israel understands that if there was a U.S. strike or a series of strikes, Iran could retaliate. It could retaliate against U.S. troops. It could retaliate against Israel. It could, even though its missiles capacity was diminished, it has rebuilt a lot of those capacities, not to the strength it had last June, but it does have the ability to do considerable damage in Israel. And I was in Israel at the end of October and actually got to see some of the areas in Tel Aviv that were struck. And this was pretty massive. I mean, we're not, even my Israeli friends were saying like we were in, having endured, rocket fire from Hamas and from Hezbollah in the north various times, which would occasionally get through the Iron Dome. And, they were in shelters, several floors below ground. And they're like, when those Iranian missiles hit, that is something different. That is clearly something very, very different. And so, there were an entire apartment block just destroyed, windows blown out within a several block radius. So again, wanting to have U.S. capabilities and assets in the region is something I can see being certainly in Israel's interests. So there's, some people are saying, well, this is just a way to stall so we can get an aircraft carrier there. We can get other, military forces in place to prepare to respond, or at least frighten Iran away from what might be a pretty overwhelming response. But you never know with Trump. I mean, he's saying, oh, they've agreed, they've stopped the killing, and they're not going to execute all these people. And, one could see that as an effort to back down. Oh, I scared them into stopping the killing. But as we know from June, I mean, he was prepared to enter the next round of talks with the Iranians within a couple days. And then, Israel went ahead and attacked, and Trump eventually joined in. It is clear that Donald Trump sees surprise and misdirection as part of a strategy.
Yeah.
We may have talked about this before. I mean, I've talked about this elsewhere, but a colleague of mine says Trump likes to govern by season finale. You just have to wait. It's going to be amazing. Even I don't know what's going to happen. You'll have to tune in. It's going to be incredible. And I don't want to joke about it, but we kind of have to joke just because it's so crazy. But that it really is true. He does like to keep people guessing. He sees that as part of being a kind of wily negotiator. And I guess that makes some sense when you're a New York real estate mogul trying to make, page 6, the celebrity tabloids. But it is something very, very different when you are the commander of the most powerful military in the world. But he doesn't really seem to see that way. He really sees this all as part of a smart strategy. So that's a really long-winded way on my part of saying, I don't know what's going to happen. He could go for it. But I think one thing we can say is, as we've discussed previously, Donald Trump is not anti-war, but he is anti-long war. So whatever happens is, as we saw in Venezuela, as we saw previously in Iran, if there is some kind of military action, he will at least see it as just, okay, we're just going to do a few things here, maybe a day, maybe 2 of strikes, not some regime facilities, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, the enemy gets a vote as well. It did not spiral out of control in June. It did not spiral out of control, or at least not yet. I mean, my own view is that there are at least several other shoes that will drop in response. There always are in response to this kind of violence, whether we're talking about the Middle East or whether we're talking about Venezuela and Latin America.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the problem with that is that by the time that happens, usually by the time that shoe drops, Trump's moved on to something else,
right,
and doesn't care,
right, and there will always be a plausible claim like, oh, I had things handled, and then this other thing happened, that's not my fault. Of course, he that's kind of always his excuse. Nothing is ever his fault. But he's spent his entire life with people cleaning up after his messes. That's unfortunately what we're dealing with.
Yeah. And I guess, speaking of those people, I think your characterization of Trump is absolutely correct. It is as straightforward as it seems. Like we try to kind of retrospectively impose rationality on his decisions, and that's not that's a exercise in futility.
Right.
But there are people around him who are acting with their own particular kind of rationality. And we've talked before about the different ideological pools in the administration. I was really struck by a small bit of reporting I saw on the meeting with the European foreign ministers, and I suspect similar things are going on with Iran, where they were scheduled to go and meet Rubio, Secretary of State Rubio, until Vice President J.D. Vance intervened and said, no, he was going to host the meeting at the White House. What do you think is going on with those ongoing power struggles within the administration?
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a big profile of Rubio that just came out in the New Yorker by, I believe it's Dexter Filkins, a good reporter. I would encourage people to read that, just, about Rubio. I'm actually working on a piece about Rubio myself for the Nation, which should come out in the next few weeks. But yeah, I mean, Rubio and Vance clearly are 2 of the most ambitious and well-positioned people to pick up, the MAGA flag after Trump. And let's also first pause and say, what does it even mean after Trump? I mean, personally, I would put it at 50-50, if not better than 50% chance that Trump just tries to stay president.
Yeah.
It is hard for me to imagine, what it looks like for Donald Trump to kind of voluntarily, willingly leave office. We know he tried his damnedest not to the last time. And he's better organized across a whole range of policy areas this time. Plus, even if he should decide to leave the White House and allow his anointed successor to take over, he will essentially still be kind of shadow president because he
Mm.
will not stop tweeting. He will not stop doing Truth Social posts. He will not stop, going out in the media. And this kind of assumes he still commands the adoration and support of a huge part of the Republican base, which I think he really, really will, because this kind of adoration is really, really cult-like, even if it kind of
Yeah.
ebbs and flows a little bit within certain parameters. But let's get back to Vance and Rubio. Yeah, I mean, Vance clearly someone has the support of, I would say, more of the MAGA base, although, he was as critical as Rubio was at one point, referred to Trump as the new Hitler.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place.
Well, Senator, this is an evolution, and I know you've been asked about this before, about past comments that you've made about Donald Trump. You've said, I'm a never Trump guy, never liked him. Terrible candidate, idiot if you voted for him, might be America's Hitler, might be a cynical a-hole, cultural heroine, noxious and reprehensible.
I was wrong about Donald Trump. I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Brett. He was a great president.
But he didn't have the offense of actually having run against Donald Trump in a primary. So I think that was something that Rubio had to overcome. But, Rubio really started trimming his sails very, very quickly after 2016. There was a profile of him in the Tampa Bay Times that just kind of talked about, how he has always been kind of a shapeshifter, always been kind of, just driven by his ambition, and always been willing to kind of betray mentors. He did this in 2016 when he ran in the primary against his supporter, Jeb Bush. There was surprise that he didn't kind of wait his turn and sort of went for it. So that's why I think, there's some, he has said publicly that if Vance chooses to run, I will not, I'll support him. I think I see that as a pretty clever way to kind of just tamp down speculation, because he doesn't want to be dealing, neither of them want to be dealing over the next 2 years of, kind of horse race. Okay, what are they doing? Basically, they want to avoid conversations like this, the one you and I are having right now, of like, where are they, who's up, who's down. He would rather not have to get preoccupied with that.
Yeah. And I mean, if Trump thinks that one of them's threatening his position of power, they'll be out.
That's right. But, in the meantime, he is, pretty shrewdly chosen his battles inside the administration. There's that famous picture of him kind of slunk down in the couch, like a 5-year-old boy in the Oval Office, while Trump and Vance are going at Ukrainian President Zelensky. Yeah. And you can tell he's miserable, and I'm sure he is miserable. I'm sure there's lots of times when he's miserable, but behind the scenes, he's actually kept the worst from happening. And I think he has worked assiduously there. I don't give him much credit for that, but I just think he has chosen his battles. He's focused on the things that really matter to him, like the Western Hemisphere, like Venezuela, clearly. And he's also, I think, pretty cleverly allowed Vance to be much more of a lightning rod, much more of the public face of having to go out there time after day to, defend the worst thing the administration is doing. Like Vance being the one out there to go out there immediately and, attack this woman, Renee Good, who was murdered in cold blood, in just on video, in full view of the country. And, treat her, call her a domestic terrorist, suggest that she was trying to kill this ICE officer by running him over, all these things which are just clearly untrue to anyone who has a set of eyes. Again, I'm always ready to be disappointed, but I do think that being the guy who went out there and basically arguing, not basically straight up arguing that, this mother of three had it coming.
Yeah.
I think that's really gonna hurt Vance. I really hope it will, and I really think it will. I mean, there was just some polling that's coming out today in the United States showing that ICE is really, its public opinion is really starting to decline, even among Republicans, because people can just see this. That is what is doing it, just footage. It's not, political leaders criticizing or whatever. It's just people can see this footage day after day after day of these, big guys in tactical gear walking around in like desert camo in snowy Minnesota, just ridiculous on its face. Like who are you hiding from in this camo gear? And just harassing people, just acting like just unaccountable assholes. And it's all pretty clear to people what's going on. So again, I'm not sure if and how Democrats are going to be able to kind of capitalize on that. I hope they will, but it's never a bad bet that Democrats will find a way to screw it up. Sorry to say. But there's also, Trump did dangle the possibility of invoking the Insurrection Act, which I'm surprised he's waited this long. I mean, I was part of and for viewers who don't know, the Insurrection Act is, something that a president can invoke in situations of emergency essentially authorizing himself to deploy the U.S. military domestically, to use the U.S. military in cities in situations of emergency, like an insurrection. And if Trump were to define these mounting protests against ICE as an insurrection, there is very little anyone can do to push back. I mean, as we've seen, there's very little, tangibly that Congress or others can do to push back already on a whole range of things he's doing. But, using the military would be kind of a new level of terrible. And actually going, I was part of a number of scenario exercises before the election. And every single one of them, I was part of 3 or 4, and they all ended with Trump, invoking the Insurrection Act. And I'm actually surprised it hasn't happened yet. He's actually been more cautious. I think he understands like this would be such a serious move. He needs to at least have some more plausible political argument for what he's doing. But it's, now that he is kind of, open to that possibility, we are approaching some really dangerous new territory.
Yeah, really dangerous. And it is, it's pretty wild to see what's happening on the streets of Minnesota and have the president talking again about the Insurrection Act, while I think sometimes even literally in the same press conference talk about helping Iranian protesters through military intervention. Like you've been quite strong about this, as has the CIP and your colleagues. There's no way to square that circle, is there? There's no universe in which U.S. military intervention helps Iranians.
No, there isn't. But and of course, it does in which military intervention helps the protesters. I don't think so. There's also like the question of, okay, say it does kind of topple the regime as we know it. What comes next? Is it worse? It very likely could be worse. This idea that you launch some strikes, it kills a bunch of top level Iranian leaders, even if it did not produce a kind of rally around the flag. And again, I agree with those who are skeptical of those claims, given the size of the protest and the intensity of the protest and the massive crisis in which Iran finds itself. That's not to say that these protesters want strikes. I don't think they do. But even if there were strikes, even if it did manage to kind of topple this regime, what comes next? Very, very likely just a straight up military IRGC controlled regime. What happens then? I think there are things that the United States can do to support these protesters. I think there's things that we should have been doing. That's a whole other argument. We can get into it. I mean, frankly, withdrawing from the JCPOA was horrible for Iranian civil society. What we've seen consistently, and this is, something I've understood from, talks with Iranian colleagues inside Iran, is like, listen, when you can dial down tension between the U.S. and the Iranian government, and again, these are not fans of the Iranian government, nor am I, but when you can dial down tension between the U.S. and Iran, that tends to open civic space inside Iran. But Trump has been doing the opposite, such that there are very few, if any at all, avenues for change. So again, it took a lot to get us here, and the U.S. and particularly Donald Trump played a pretty bad role. That's not to absolve the Iranian government. Obviously, we don't need to list their offenses, which are very, very many. But yeah, to see Donald Trump and all these other conservatives who are defending the harassment and arrest of protesters, the shooting of Renee Good in Minnesota, now coming out to pretend to be supporters of human rights, it's just so cynical and instrumental.
Yeah, it's gross. Let's go back then, I think, to the opposition at home. We just had Elizabeth Saunders on the show last week, and we had this discussion about whether the administration is weak or not, whether it's in danger of overstretch given, deployment everywhere, potentially deployment at home. And there is significant democratic resistance. We were just talking about protest in Iran, but there's significant protest at home in the States, and it's taking lots of different forms in terms of, protest on the street. The head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, issuing a really strong statement against Trump and seeming to get him to, walk back.
On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president. This is about whether the Fed will be able to continue to set interest rates based on evidence and economic conditions, or whether instead monetary policy will be directed by political pressure or intimidation. Public service sometimes requires standing firm in the face of threats. I will continue to do the job the Senate confirmed me to do, with integrity and a commitment to serving the American people.
What do you think all of that, the different kinds of protests, the different scales, I know this is a really hard question to answer, but what does that tell us about the relative position of the administration?
Well, I mean, the administration, from the beginning, he's been an historically unpopular president. From day one. I think it's inched down a little bit, and maybe it inches up, but it's always stayed pretty steadily low. I think, this thing with Powell is significant. You have seen rising protests against ICE, but I think the problem is our political elite has so immunized itself from political pressure just over many years. And this is a problem of both parties. Let's go back. You had, before the Iraq War, you had some of the biggest protests in American history, not just in the United States, around the world. And you had a president who said, well, it's like a focus group. Again, going back to 2020, you had, again, some of the biggest protests in American history after the murder of George Floyd. What did it do in terms of, police reform? It did nothing. And again, now, during Gaza, again, under a Democratic president, you had enormous protests for weeks all over the country, not just on campuses. The campuses got the attention, but there were, protests in cities and elsewhere, and other forms of protests. People using every tool they had. Like I've heard just from members of Congress, people from kind of conservative districts who, the phone calls were like 10-1 against the Gaza policy. People were using every tool that they could think of, and it made zero difference. And this was under a Democratic president. We know there's opposition. We know that people want to resist this, but we are all sort of at a loss for, okay, what can we do? What tools do we have to actually impose costs on this administration such that they change course?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Please tell us. Help us fix America. Yeah, no, it's very much this bind that we've gotten ourselves into, and I continually regret that others, around the world are paying the cost given America's enormous influence in the way we've always kind of used our power kind of selfishly, but even far, far more so under Donald Trump.
Yeah, and look, I think there is recognition of that around the world, and certainly a push within Australia and elsewhere to reframe our relationship with the United States so that it recognizes, what is actually happening and re-engages on a democratic level rather than just on this kind of shallow president to prime minister level that doesn't, engage with actual real people on the ground.
Right.
But there's a lot of work to do,
right?
I think,
Absolutely.
before that happens. In the meantime, Matt, thank you so much for taking us through this huge mess with such generosity and patience. We always appreciate it.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. And I think one time I need to come and we're just going to tell jokes.
That's a great idea.
We'll not talk about any current events. We'll just save up some jokes.
I think
30 minutes of jokes. All right.
Let's book it in. Done.
Okay.
Thanks,
right.
Matt.
All right. See you later.
Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode. You can save $5 off our latest book, A Time for Bravery: What Happens When Australia Chooses Courage, with the code POD5. That's POD5. The discount is available for a limited time only. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. You can reach us via our email address, which is podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. This episode was recorded on Friday, the 16th of January, Australian time. After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation and produced by Angus Blackman. We'll be back next week. I'm Emma Shortis. Thanks for listening.